primary goal of this project is to examine the ways in which genre is used to create authority within discourse communities. Patricia Bizzell defines a discourse community as a group of people who share certain language-using practices, noting that stylistic conventions regulate social interactions both within the group and in its dealings with outsiders. Canonical knowledge regulates the worldviews of group members and how they interpret experience. Bizzell continues, discourse suggests a community bound together primarily by its uses of language, although bound perhaps by other ties as well, geographical, socioeconomic, ethnic, professional, and so on. For the purposes of this project, I will focus on the genre of academic journals, more specifically, journal articles focusing on the subject of hate groups. I choose this genre primarily because many of the authors base their research on data provided by the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC, of Montgomery, Alabama, which promotes itself as an authority on hate groups and produces an annual hate map which purports to illustrate the distribution of these groups across the U.S. I propose that the SPLC's data are flawed because they are often subjective and generally fail to meet academic standards of accuracy, as we shall soon see. These numbers are subsequently misinterpreted by academic authors, who base their research on these flawed data, which runs the risk of undermining their findings. Before an accurate count of anything can be made, it is necessary to precisely define that thing. This is fundamental to all academic research. This is the language that creates the canonical knowledge that Bizzell referred to. There is no legal definition for hate group, which is why even the FBI cannot designate hate groups. Mark Potok, the SPLC's intelligence director, confirmed this to USA Today in 2002, as did FBI agent Jeff Lanza in 2007. Without a fixed definition, the term hate group is entirely subjective. It means whatever the user chooses it to mean. Freilich notes that neither the Anti-Defamation League or the SPLC provide precise definitions of militias or other hate groups, and yet many researchers base their studies around information provided by these two organizations. The SPLC's definition reads simply, all hate groups have beliefs or practices that attack or malign an entire class of people, typically for their immutable characteristics. The underlying flaw in this definition is the highly subjective nature of the terms attack or malign, which allow for a broad range of interpretation. The SPLC also provides a caveat to its hate map. Listing here does not imply a group advocates or engages in violence or other criminal activity. This is problematic because many of the researchers rely on SPLC data to correlate hate groups with hate crimes, and yet the SPLC itself claims no such correlation. In 2008, Mark Potok reaffirmed his organization's position during a recorded interview with a group of teachers visiting SPLC headquarters. Our criteria for a hate group, first of all, have nothing to do with criminality or violence or any kind of guess we're making about this group could be dangerous. It's strictly ideological. If the SPLC's own Director of Intelligence doesn't consider these groups to be criminal or violent, why should anyone interpret his data otherwise? Another question is the accuracy of the SPLC's basic data set, the hate group count. This past March, Mr. Potok designated 784 hate groups active in the U.S. in 2014. Of those 784 groups, Mr. Potok provides no information that researchers or journalists could use to verify his claims. Over 130 groups are not affiliated with any known city or town, as West Virginia's hate map demonstrates. Potok provides no information for 18 out of 19 chapters of the Aryan Terror Brigade. 14 out of 15 chapters of the Creativity Alliance cannot be located. And Mr. Potok cannot produce a location for a single chapter of the White Boy Society. All 40 of these unaffiliated hate groups are included in the final total for 2014. In the 1990s, investigative journalist Laird Wilcox compiled annual directories of groups and organizations on both the right and the left. Working in the days before the internet, Wilcox was able to contact all of the groups in his directories and provide basic information on them. In his 1998 report, The Watchdogs, Wilcox noted that the SPLC routinely included groups in its lists that were either only rumored to exist or nothing more than a P.O. box, thereby misleadingly padding their list. Wilcox also noted the SPLC's lack of verifiable data. In March of this year, Mark Pitcavage of the Anti-Defamation League echoed Wilcox's claims about the SPLC's hate group counts. The SPLC's list is wildly inflated, said Pitcavage. They list groups where there are no groups, only a couple of individuals. Mark Potok was invited to speak at JMU in September of 2011, and I took the opportunity to ask him directly about the unaffiliated groups on his map, which by that time had reached 26% of the total count. After conceding that my question was not illegitimate, Mr. Potok stated on video that his hate map was a very rough measure. Potok continued that his map illustrated the growth in hate groups anecdotally, and that overall his hate map counts were an imperfect process. After further considering my question, Mr. Potok declared that the unaffiliated groups were simply statewide chapters. Again, if the Director of Intelligence, who is personally responsible for the SPLC's hate map, states that his own numbers are anecdotal, imperfect, and a very rough measure, why should researchers treat them as anything more? Now that we've had a closer look at the SPLC's hate group data, the next question is, who is using this information and why? A review of recent studies and articles based on hate map information shows the wide diversity of disciplines and journals that accept the SPLC's numbers as accurate. Earlier, I noted that Mark Potok has stated that the sole criterion the SPLC looks for when designating hate groups is ideology. Ideology may play an important role in understanding why researchers use the SPLC's numbers and why many reviewers and editors accept those numbers without verification. Anthony Perret cites Fairclough's description of the naturalization of ideology within discourse communities. A particular set of discourse conventions implicitly embodies certain ideologies, particular knowledge and beliefs, particular positions for the types of social subject that participate in that practice. Perret further notes that the automatic ritual unfolding of genres makes them appear normal, even inevitable. They are simply the way things are done, and their status as historical practice within institutions or disciplines makes them appear immutable, and certainly beyond the influence of the transitory individuals who participate in them. One explanation for why researchers and journalists simply accept the SPLC's claims without vetting them may be because so many others before them have done so. Ryan and Leeson use SPLC data. Jefferson and Pryor cite the SPLC's exhaustive list. Mulholland also designates the SPLC as an authority on hate group activity while citing Mr. Potock's hate group numbers. Adamczyk repeats Mark Potock's oft-cited prediction that there would be an explosive growth in the number of hate groups with the election of President Obama. Ironically, according to Potock's own hate map, the number of hate groups has dropped 23% since 2009. Even more ironic is the fact that Adamczyk's co-authors, Chermak, Freilich, and Grunwald, routinely cite SPLC data in their numerous reports. This is the same Freilich who earlier noted that the SPLC's lack of a precise hate group definition may undermine confidence in the validity of the counts, and yet he and his colleagues use those counts freely in their work. This is especially disturbing as all four authors work for a think tank funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and their findings, based on flawed SPLC data, are routinely accepted and republished by the DHS. Wrtc also repeats Potock's Obama claim, noting that his study builds upon earlier work by Jefferson and Pryor. Here we can also see the mutual cross-citation practices that reinforces the authority of the SPLC's claims. Wrtc, Mulholland, and Ryan all cite Jefferson and Pryor's 1999 article, which alluded to the SPLC's exhaustive list. Adamczyk cites Mulholland, Freilich cites Chermak, Chermak cites Grunwald, and so on. Jefferson and Pryor state that, based on the SPLC's numbers, they simply assume that the presence of an alleged hate group signals intolerance. They then qualify this sentence with a footnote, stating that if this assumption is erroneous, the point of the exercise is lost. At the end of their study, the authors concluded that the presence of an SPLC-designated hate group did not correlate with their assumption of county-wide intolerance. In other words, their assumption was wrong. Even though Jefferson and Pryor report that they were unable to obtain significant or robust results, their study is widely cited to bolster other studies. The authors go as far as to admit that they have no way to judge the quality of the SPLC's information, and yet, like so many researchers after them, they built their entire study around this unverifiable data. They also hit upon another flaw in the SPLC's hate map count. Among the groups listed are bookstores, publishers, churches, a flag seller, a Confederate t-shirt shop, and an Italian restaurant in Pennsylvania known for its controversial marquee signs. These groups may meet the SPLC's criteria of offending some, but they are clearly not the violent reactionaries many of the researchers imply them to be. This brings us back to the fundamental question of how authority is created in discourse communities. Bazell, Paré, and Fairclough state that these genre communities are built around shared language, beliefs, and ideologies. Luzon notes that ideology of the communities that own the genres is reflected in the rhetorical construction of these genres and how genres help construct social structures. Professional documents are seen not as neutral and objective writing, but as social constructs. As social constructs, these documents are written to meet the expectations of their discourse communities. Ioannidis finds that much research, especially in the social sciences, is often unreliable as the findings cannot be reproduced by independent researchers. Researchers are human beings too, and so bias is another factor, as Jefferson and Pryor demonstrated by bringing their assumptions to their study. Adamczyk et al. State in their research that intuition would suggest that the presence of a hate group would lead to increased hate crimes. Intuition and assumption are not the tools of science. Data sources may be biased in the information they collect. As an SPLC representative told Charles Cook of the National Review, "We're not set up to cover the extreme left." Yancey notes that the SPLC's reputation among academics as experts on hate groups may bias researchers into accepting the SPLC's data without examining the methodology behind it. And finally, when research is refuted, even by its own authors, it still remains in the archives of literature, where, as with Jefferson and Pryor, it may go on to live a long life as part of the work of others for decades. And so we come full circle. Genres, like hate group studies, are created by discourse communities that share common language, beliefs, and ideologies. Canonical knowledge, as Bazell noted, is key to creating those communities' worldview, and in academic circles, published research, it seems, is key to creating canonical knowledge. Researchers and their communities are only human. They may bring their own biases or those of their sources to their studies. Many researchers need to publish in order to retain funding or in pursuit of tenure, and so may have an interest in tailoring their findings to the expectations of their primary audiences. The cross-citation of the SPLC's claims create an aura of authority. SPLC reports are disseminated to print, television, and online media, where they are repeated verbatim, acquiring an imprimatur of authority from those sources, such as NPR or the New York Times. Researchers cite the SPLC as authorities. The SPLC cites those researchers as experts. Other researchers cite previous studies, and the cycle continues. And if the findings are eventually refuted, even by their own authors, the literature remains in the archives indefinitely and is never withdrawn. After examining the ways in which discourse communities create authority, at least among the select journals and studies cited here, it appears that repetition and cross-citation of information, even flawed data such as the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate group claims, eventually creates an accretion or patina of authority for the data, its creators, and its users over time. This, I believe, is one key way in which authority is manufactured within certain discourse communities.